All right, Jonathan. Thanks so much for joining us, CEO of Shuckin Shack. Um, I know it took a while for us to finally get connected, so again, appreciate your
Sure.
patience there. But I think this one is going to be a great episode for our audience, just based on your experience, what you're doing in the restaurant space, of course, but also on the franchising side and how you've grown. So, without me butchering it, Jonathan, I'll pass it over to you for an intro that is worthy of you.
Well, pretty short and sweet.
Yeah.
Shuckin Shack started in 2007, open location number 2 in 2012. I am not a founder of the brand, so I came from the outside. I was a customer of the brand and working at an adjacent business and watched the first restaurant open, became friends with the owners. And then I helped them build the second restaurant in 2012. And then in 2014, early in 14, I was working for another company, and the owners called me and said, essentially, we're thinking about franchising. Is this something that you're interested in? I knew nothing about franchising. I had my very first official job was working for a franchisee of PostNet, and so that was the limited extent of my knowledge. So
Yeah.
I did have a good feeling for that, but I had worked in customer service industry at that point for um, you know 15 years. And so in anywhere from just, kind of associate all the way up through management, and knew a lot about systems and procedures, had worked in Fortune 100 companies, and had really good exposure to a lot of different things. My resume, if you will, is pretty interesting. And so
Yeah.
I've had the opportunity to do some cool things and work for some great companies. So when they called me, I said, sure, it's something I would love to do. I'm entrepreneurial in spirit, and
Yeah.
started several of my own businesses and had moderate success, I guess you could say. And so when they called me, I liked them. I loved the concept. I was a customer first, and so I knew it had legs. And because I had worked for such a great history of brands, I kind of knew that they were onto something. So I joined them in 2014, not really having a title, and we started expanding. And then I was named CEO in late 2014.
Okay. Very
Yep.
cool. Well, thanks
Yeah.
for the background there. That's interesting and obviously good growth. And just for clarity, Jonathan, so CEO is the title, I assume you're tasked with overseeing the entire all locations for Shuck and Shack, not just one. What does your day look like as CEO there, as it relates to
It
all of them?
varies. No 2 days are the same.
Yeah.
I think as we've grown and I've gotten more involved with, let's call it the macro industry of franchising. Uh, ma- what you may not know about franchising, and those listening or watching, whatever, it's it's a small world. It's a fairly small world, and so while there's a ton of franchise businesses. I think the last statistic was that franchise businesses make up about 7% of the entire U.S. economy, as far as the
Mm,
number of businesses, which is a ton, but are responsible for almost 40% of the GDP,
yeah.
as it relates to the macro industry. So as you get involved in different associations like IFA and some of these others, I travel a lot, so I do a lot of store visits. I go to a lot of conferences for ongoing education, because one of the things about franchising as a whole is that while there are some axiomatic things that never change or that haven't changed in some time, it's a moving target. And so franchising is consistently mismonikered, I guess you could say. And so there's a lot of legislation out there that happens. And so for us on the executive level, it's constant ongoing education on our
Yeah.
side. We're always learning about what's coming down the pipe, what's happening. For me, a lot of my time is in planning and looking at long term strategy. I think early days, even with a CEO title, it was really just all hands on deck because I was essentially employee number one. Now that
Right.
I have a staff under me, and our total restaurant staff is over 600 at this point. Generally, my days vary. I spend a lot of time on looking at development plans, working with development budgets, determining markets of approach, target markets, looking at what we're going to spend in those markets, how we recruit franchisees, and then furthermore, once we get those franchisees into the system, how are we going to find them space? And so a lot of what I do is working in commercial real estate. We have commercial real estate partners, and then it goes, because we're a brick and mortar traditional business. And so I'm working with our real estate partners and our franchisees on lease negotiations. We're doing, essentially feasibility studies. We're looking at business plans and pro formas. We're working on anything from financing all the way through reviewing construction plans. There's no 2 days that are identical. Some days,
Yeah.
yesterday I had manuals to review, so I had 300 pages worth of manuals to review. And so that's what I did yesterday. But today it's a little bit different. I have this podcast now. This afternoon, we're going to break a world record for the most ugly Christmas sweaters, and so I'm going to go to one of our restaurants and put on an ugly Christmas sweater and have fun. So it really varies.
Yeah, I totally get it. And I was chatting with somebody recently, and I was like, you know what, that perspective from, I don't want to call us average Joes, but folks that have never been a CEO is something interesting to think about, because you don't really know until you get into that role. But my perspective is like, there's a lot of things that I mean, you just went through a laundry list of stuff that if I were in your seat, I don't have the skill set necessarily on paper to be able to, effectively review contracts, or look at land development. Like, that's not my thing. It's not real estate's not my thing. And obviously the industry itself is, I haven't been in the restaurant space ever. But if I was like the CEO of anything else, you're wearing a bunch of hats
That's
and you
right.
have your hand in a lot of different things. So I guess an interesting question there, Jonathan, is, are there any skill sets that, like, getting into the role that you're in now, where you could, raise your hand and be like, yeah, this is, I lack in this area, and I'm doing XYZ to kind of, correct that, or get better in my role in that specific area, that you're like,
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that early on, I was named CEO at 29, and so really,
yeah,
really early on in my career, and I'm 39 now, and so I've had 10 years in the seat, and for me, I think that one thing I have learned is that not everyone is going to absorb information the same way. And that,
yeah,
that relates to your direct team. So I have roughly 7 direct reports, and then, kind of a management level underneath them. And so what I learned early on is that I am, just generally speaking, a concise person. So
yeah,
I am not someone that um, traditionally over explains things or thinks they over explains things. When I do communicate, I view it as valuable communication. But what I have
hmm,
learned over the last 10 years is that you need to be communicating all the time, pretty much about everything. And that was a steep hill for me to climb, because
yeah,
that's not how I am in my personal life. And
hmm,
so professionally speaking, it was quite the adjustment.
right,
I think just some general skill sets that make, I won't say successful CEOs, but at least successful managers or leaders on this side, is specifically as it relates to franchising. Grit is number one.
yeah,
There will be days where you wake up and you think, what the hell am I doing? Like, why
right,
am I putting myself through this stress? I could do something else, certainly make more money or less money. The money doesn't really matter, but not deal with the stress or the burden of responsibilities. And there's other days where it's you're flying high, like everything is clicking. But I
yeah,
think one of the things you have to learn from a leadership and from a C-level executive standpoint is taking ownership over the things that you do know and that you don't know. And
hmm,
if you don't know something, be the first to admit it and work to put someone in the seat that can I guess fill that gap for you on your leadership team.
yeah,
For me, on our team, I would generally consider myself a tactician, and so like from a big dreaming standpoint, certainly I can do that, but I'm more valuable in the sense when I work with other big dreamers. So
yeah,
I have several dreamers on my team where they say, hey, we want to do this, or we want to make this big, or how can we do this, or how can we get on this national, TV show, or how can we get on this podcast, or how can we do this, or how can we break a world record? And I say, okay, let's think about this. And then boom, 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 boom.
yeah,
So yeah, I think like an engineer. And so for
yes,
me, it's, put people in front of you or around you that are smarter than you. Don't be afraid to admit what you don't know, and then work to fill in those gaps.
hmm. Man, there's so many good things you just said there, let me camp out on the communication piece, because I think what's lost with between employee and like C-suite, if you will, or founders, owners, whatever, at any company. I've worked in technology sales, and I've been part of organizations that have 150 people. I've been part of ones that have over 2,000 people. What the common theme is that the employees don't feel like they're connected to the top as
Sure.
well as they'd like to be. I'm curious from the top's perspective, like if everybody agrees with that sentiment, including the top, great, we need to communicate with our employees better. Do you ever feel like you can communicate too much? Like if you came out and put a video out every single day that got distributed to all employees over email, about, hey guys, here's what we're doing today, or whatever that video, it could be a 30-second spot, it could be whatever.
Sure.
Do you think that like employees would ever get to a place where it's like, God, Jonathan communicates too much with us?
Well, I think it's knowing your company culture, and I think that's a key differentiating factor. In that, you look at Shuckin Shack, you go to our website, you visit any one of our locations. We're laid back, we're coastal, we're kind of dive bar. I won't say that we don't have rules on what dress code is and uniform and
Yeah.
all those things, but we're far more relaxed. We'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission. And we take that approach even with the culture within our four walls of our restaurants when we're dealing with our customers and our guests.
Yeah.
We're a bar that serves great food. And so
Mm,
we want to maintain that company culture first and foremost at the guest experience, which translates up into the employee experience, which translates up into the management experience, which translates up into the C-level experience. So for us, whenever we're focused on C-level decisions or C-level communications down to the frontline employees, the things that we're talking, I mean, we're asking questions as simple as, before you click send on that email, is anyone going to read it? Before you click send on that email, will anyone even open it? And
yeah.
so we are trying to vary communication and differentiate communication based upon the audience. So if it's for our management staff, it's for our strategic franchise partners, if it's for our vendor relationships, you've got to figure out the best way to approach each of those things. And then you
Yeah.
also have to have a strong consideration for what your frontline employee culture is, because if we are talking about hiring for personality or hiring for a specific culture, how does that person respond? Not everyone
Mm,
is going to open an email.
yeah.
They may want to be texted. They
Yeah.
may want to open a video. They may want to see a TikTok style video. They may want to see something that's in your face and maybe a little over the line as it comes to communication. So you have to be
Mm,
really, really cognizant of not just what you're communicating or how frequently you're communicating, but how you're communicating it too. I
yeah.
think in more traditional business sense, if you're at a big three accounting firm, I can't imagine the email volume they get every day. It's
Right.
simply not that way here, because people in our system aren't, they don't have the alacrity to open emails like someone in a traditional business sense, suit and tie, might. And so you
Yeah.
just have to figure out the best way to do those things in order to get the best response rate.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about the franchise development perspective there at Shuck and Check. One, are you involved in that? How involved are you? But two, kind of what is your Fran Dev process, and how many units are you at today, and where do you want to get to?
Sure. So, yeah, I'm fully involved in the friend dev process. We've both had it in house and outsourced. It's been back in house since March of this year. We're actually getting ready to outsource it again with another development group. Um, it's a lot of what I do, and
Yeah.
the units that we're at today, we're at 18 units. We always have about 3 to 5 trailing units, meaning we have 3 to 5 units either in real estate or construction, right? Pretty much all the time.
Yeah.
Um, that's about what we're comfortable with. We actually don't keep unit goals. We don't want to be misled by big numbers, and so our primary goal is to open healthy restaurants. If that's one a year, then that's one a year. If it's 5 a year, then it's 5 a year. If it's
Got it.
10 a year, one day it will be. Then it's 10 a year. Um,
Mm,
Franchise development has changed so much. COVID was a big kind of watershed moment for it. Um, Pre-COVID, it was a lot different than it is post-COVID,
mhm.
because quite frankly, you are dealing with the general public and their whims and desires and the things that they are interested in. And so,
Yeah.
you guys are in home services. Home services right now, and has been for about 3.5 years, king. I mean,
Mm,
if you look up any franchise opportunity on any portal, if you look up, on Biz Buy Sell, if you just search franchising opportunities in my area, those sponsored Google clicks, almost all of them are going to be home service brands.
Right.
And so it's changed. I personally think that Fran Dev is the most difficult thing that we do,
Yeah.
because we, in particular at Shuckin Shack, speaking on Shuckin Shack's behalf, we are looking for a very specific candidate,
Hmm.
which is far different than many other brands who have, like I talked about earlier, company culture. Many other brands who have, this is the playbook. As long as you put the playbook in place, you're going to be successful. That's not
Hmm.
necessarily the case, in as it relates to Shuck and Shack and other companies that have unique cultures. And so for us,
Right.
we are looking for a very specific candidate, which essentially both shrinks the pond and shrinks the number of fish in the pond. And so
Yeah.
I think it's the toughest thing that we do. It's challenging from a budgeting standpoint. It costs an enormous amount of money to bring on a new franchisee. Um, yeah, and it's a big part of what I do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned you were with an outsourced company, brought it back in house. Now you're
Mhm.
going potentially back out to another outsourced company. Obviously, not naming names or anything, but can
Sure.
you kind of give us some insight for other franchise or me specifically? What was the decision to outsource then insource now go back outsource? What have you experienced that made you
So we
make that?
started basically pretty much insourced. I would recommend everyone doing that. It's
Mhm.
there's plenty of opportunity for you to sell your franchising rights. Let's say you have a successful business and it's been operational for 3, 4, 5 years. You open a second unit or a third unit, and unit I use loosely. It's not even just brick and mortar. It can be a second territory or a third territory. You get some multiple market proof. Those things are performing just as well. And this happens all the time. You get approached by someone in the franchising business who's local, and says, "Hey, I think you've got a great thing going. You should franchise." And you say, "Okay." And the story that they tell you is, "It'll be great. You'll make a lot of money."
Mhm.
You're essentially teaching other people across the United States or across the region, or wherever, how to run your business, and you get to reap all the rewards. Well, that's kind of true.
Yeah.
What's really true is that it takes an inordinate amount of time. It takes an inordinate amount of money. It's incredibly frustrating, and you're in the business of convincing. Franchising is not like running your own restaurant, your own junk removal service. It's not like running your own company locations. You are in the business of convincing others. In
Yeah.
the sense of, you are in the business of convincing your franchisees to do what you need them to do in order to make their business successful. And so when we're looking at insourcing versus outsourcing franchise development, you have to keep that in mind. That's why I always recommend people doing it internally first. You need to learn the ropes. You need to learn what your ideal candidate looks like. You need to
Mhm.
learn the successes and failures of the people that you're bringing into your system. And I think
Yeah.
it's really important to spend time doing that. I did our franchise development for about 14 months. I did all the calls. I did all the email releases. And that was invaluable to me, because now when we're outsourcing it to other companies that are helping us grow from the development standpoint, I can say, no, I've been on these phone calls. I know exactly what sort of questions these folks ask. I know exactly the way we need to answer those questions. I know exactly what we need to communicate. Whereas if you go straight to outsourcing, you may not know that, because you haven't learned the ropes, you haven't experienced those things. I think there's benefits to both. Certainly, when you outsource your friend Dev, there's a tremendous amount of trust that goes on, but also you have to be ready to grow. You have to have an operations team ready to grow. You have to have a marketing team that knows how to market in varied spaces and varied markets. And so all of those things are really important. You have to have a system under you before you go into that development side.
Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Are you seeing a trend or like a candidate profile that works well with Shuck and Shack of like, do they come from the restaurant space? Are they corporate refugees? Are they just entrepreneurial spirited folks? Like, what does that candidate profile look like for Shuck and Shack?
Yeah, we have pretty varied candidate profiles. You always have your dreamers, what I call the dreamers, which are, I've always wanted to own a bar or restaurant. And that's
Yeah.
very common across the board for anyone that's in the restaurant space. Whereas someone who's been an accountant for 25 years, someone who's worked in sales, typically a lot of people who work in sales who've made good money, but are tired of making an enormous amount of money for someone else who says, I kind of like talking to people. I think I'd be a good restaurant owner. And a lot of times
Yeah.
that's the truth. And so
Mm,
we see a lot of folks who are um, somewhat corporate refugees. We see a lot of folks who are kind of the dreamer type. We have people who've been in the restaurant industry, who've been in, the GM or the area manager level and said, I'm tired of working my fingers to the bone and having the same salary and, $5,000 bonus every year. I kind of would like to make this my own. I understand the ropes. I understand food costs and labor costs and all of those things. There's no reason that I couldn't have my own restaurant. And then we
right.
have veterans in our system. We have quite a few veterans in our system who make excellent franchisees kind of across the board. They understand the bigger picture of things. They don't get caught in the minutia of the details of you're right and I'm wrong and I'm right and you're wrong and all of those things. They know how to follow systems and they give timely and correct feedback. And so I think you'll
Yeah.
find that in the restaurant side and in the home services side, you get a wide range of candidates.
Yeah. Let's pan out for a second, Jonathan. I think what you mentioned earlier was interesting to hear about just how last 3.5 years folks are gravitating towards home services, and you
Hmm.
see it all over the place. In the direction of just where franchising is going, let's call it the next 3.5 years. How do you see kind of the right? Because historically, like I think when folks think about franchising, at least for me, I thought you always think about fast food. You think about
Everybody.
McDonald's,
Yep.
Chick-fil-A. You think hospitality with hotels. Um, and there's a reason for that. But like, where do you think the restaurant space, the hospitality space is going in the next 3 to 5 years as it relates to what you just said about home services? Like, do you think home services is still going to have like a strong pool on franchise candidates, long term, or do you think we're going to start to see folks starting to get back into? "Well, I'm really interested in brick and mortar or restaurant, whatever that may be. Maybe it's health and wellness, maybe it's restaurants, whatever. What is your vision
I
there?
think statistics show that the industry as a whole, meaning franchising across all sectors, is going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
One thing, just anecdotally, I mean, looking at home services in particular, I think, as a homeowner, I think that we are realizing as homeowners that we value time more than anything else. And especially
Mhm.
when you work, I travel 100 plus days a year. And so when I'm home, I want to be home and I
Yeah.
don't want to mow the yard and I don't want to fix my gutters and I don't want to carry junk to the landfill. I
Mhm.
want to have that done for me and I'm willing to pay the price to do that. And so I think home services will continue to grow and I think it will become um, even a little more segmented, meaning I believe that we will find things cropping up in home services that are new that we've never heard of and never
Right.
even realized, could be franchisable. But all of a
Mhm.
sudden there's, a ton of white space in the United States and there's a ton of opportunity for people to do that.
Yeah.
Um, I've always found franchising interesting, but especially on the home services side, we bought a building, commercial building, and there was a bunch of stuff in it that we didn't want, and so we called one of the junk hauling companies, and they were here in like 30 minutes and charged us $200 to take off, a half a truckload worth of stuff, and it was worth every penny because they got
Mhm.
it out for us. And so
Yeah.
if you can do something like that, I mean, that's so repeatable. The margins have to be excellent. And so, but then on the restaurant side, we saw this huge swell pre COVID, I would say from 2016 to 2019. If there was a restaurant concept, it felt like on earth, it felt like they were franchising. I mean, I would go to trade shows, both national trade shows and regional trade shows, and almost every person in a booth there was restaurateur. And now
Yeah.
that has completely changed. And it's
Mhm.
almost like you don't see that anymore, but it's coming back. I think people are realizing. I just had this conversation yesterday with someone with actually our marketing team, our PR firm. And I think people are realizing that post COVID, they desire good service, they desire good food, they want to go out and dine for an experience, and they're willing to pay for it. And so
Yeah.
I believe, I'm very bullish on franchising as a whole. I think it's going to continue to grow because I just think from a statistics standpoint, people look at franchising as franchisors as safety nets. There's a proven system in place where could I go out and do this on my own? Practically speaking, of course I could. But
Mhm.
am I a marketer? No, but they have a marketing team. Am I an excellent operator? Probably not right away, but they have an operations and training team. You know,
Yeah.
do I know how to convert leads if I'm in home services? Well, no, I don't have any idea how I even get my leads. Well, they have a call center. And so thinking through
Mhm.
all of these things, it makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah. Man, you're speaking my language about home ownership. I literally was thinking the exact same thing when we moved in this home earlier this year, and I was like, it was the first time we had been a homeowner,
Hmm.
like not part of an HOA that took care of the exterior. So I'm like, I got this yard now. I got to figure out like how much is that going to cost? I don't want to do it. I just got my gutters cleaned last week. I was like, I could probably do that, but I don't have a ladder that reaches that corner. I've got a ladder that reaches this
Exactly.
one. Is it even safe to go up there with a leaf blower and just blow everything out? Like, is there, I'm like, I don't even want to mentally think about it because that also costs me time and money. Um, Two things about just interesting home service concepts that I think are creeping up that you wouldn't think about that I learned about recently. One is a barbecue grill
Yeah.
cleaning.
Yeah. I've
I
seen
was
that.
like, what is that? And then dryer vent cleaning
Yep.
was another one. I was like, those are two just interesting concepts. And, I'm probably going to at some point consume that as a home service owner now that I
That's
know
right.
about it.
That's
And I
right.
never knew, you never knew the problem even existed. But if you can save me from a house fire, I'm all about it.
That's right. That's right.
uh, let's try to start to wrap it up here, Jonathan, with the franchisee candidates that you talk to or the ones you award, what's kind of the biggest aha moment that they have throughout that process or when they get into, being a Shuckin Shack owner that's like, oh, I didn't know this about the restaurant space, or I didn't know this about the franchise space that you kind of are brought in to, kind of help educate them on. Anything in particular pop up
Yeah,
with,
I
with
think the biggest thing is always, without fail, is that you bring people into your system, you set expectations, they go through training, they go through this long, strenuous build out process and planning process and real estate process. And so it takes a long time. So it takes, at right now, it takes about 12 to 14 months from signing to opening, which is a
yeah,
long time. You have to have a tremendous amount of grit. You have to be okay with a little pain every now and then. That's just a part of it. Things are
yeah,
slower. Things move a little bit slower now post COVID as far as development is concerned. So you get through that process, and then when they open the doors, without fail, every single time, there's this moment where it's they realize that the journey has just started,
yeah.
and the restaurant is open 363 days a year, um,
Hmm.
13 hours a day. And so what
Yeah.
you going to do now? You can't
Hmm.
be tired. It's not
No.
over. It actually just
Hmm.
started, and you've got a 10-year lease in front of you along with a 10-year franchise agreement. And so
Hmm.
the last 14 months may have been very, very difficult. And for many of our franchisees, the most difficult thing they've ever done professionally. Well,
Yeah.
that's just, I mean, that's a fingernail's worth. That's
Yeah.
nothing. So
Hmm.
get ready to work the next 365 days in a row, because that's what it's going to take. And
Yeah.
no, you won't have to do that in year three, but for the first 2 years, you've got to put your time in. And then, kind of pairing with that, is the idea that it is your business now as a franchisee. It is your business. We are
Yeah.
there to help you grow that business. We align on one thing, and that one thing is to get more customers in our system, because a customer to you is a customer to me. You make money through customers, so do I, off of royalties. And so for us, we align on that vision, but it's ultimately up to you to operate. So you have to
Absolutely.
deliver on what you've promised that you would do, which is maximize the system. And that's
Yeah.
really, really, really difficult, because I think people get in their head this idea that when I open the door, there's going to be a line wrapped around the block. That is so
Mm.
rare. That is so
Hmm.
rare. Chick-fil-A does it because they're Chick-fil-A, and quite frankly, they're the best in the business at everything. Krispy
Yeah.
Kreme does it. There's several other companies that are able to do that, but a vast majority of franchise systems don't work that way. 99.99% of franchise systems do not work that way. You
Right.
have to be able to work. You have to know how to acquire your customers. You have to be the best marketer of your own store that you've ever been. And so it's a
Hmm.
lot of work, and it does not stop.
Yeah. That's good stuff and a great place to end. Put the work in, put the time in. I was going to say that you mentioned the 12 to 14 month period that's challenging. That to me is a different challenge, somewhat in that like you're not making any money, you're seeing no cash
That's
flow.
right.
You're just waiting on the site to open, and then when it opens, you start to see some cash flow. But even then, now your grit and your pain comes in different forms and fashions,
That's right.
especially in the restaurant space. Right, you're dealing with people in your face every day. Even more so than like in my world in junk removal, like we are showing up at homes and doing stuff for folks face to face, but it's less volume. We're
But
not seeing.
they called you.
They called us, yeah. Like
Yeah,
we're showing up. Like we got to do our part. We got to be
sure,
communicative and show up uniform to be nice and transparent and all that stuff. And there is a customer experience there, but man,
sure.
the restaurant space is completely different. Like I totally get the sentiment there, and I'm not even in the restaurant space. I'm like, I get it. Someone's going to complain. Food was
That's
too
right.
cold. Service at the hostess was gave me a weird look. Like man, just stuff that you got to be prepared for. So I totally get that.
Absolutely.
Well, Jonathan, we appreciate the time. If you want folks to find you, find Shuckin Shack, what's the best way for them to find you guys, to reach out to you? What are your
Sure. If
handles?
you go to our website, theshuckinshack.com, of course, I'm on LinkedIn. That's the only social I have, but
Okay,
theshuckinshack.com.
amazing. We'll be sure to link that and spread the word as well. For some reason I'm familiar with Shuckin Shack. That's how I found you. Maybe it's because I'm local to North Carolina, but
Sure.
I expect this to grow and grow very quickly. And sounds like you guys are trying to do it the right way, which is awesome. So again, appreciate the time, and we'll let you get back to your day and have a good
Sure.
weekend.
Thanks, Davis. You too.
All right.
Take care.